Hello everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of October the 9th till 15th, 2023. We have a really intense and important week ahead of us, not just in the context of this week, but the larger astrological period, so the larger cycle, because there is a lot happening in the sky. One of the highlights of the week, without a shadow of a doubt, is this upcoming annular solar eclipse taking place in the sign of Libra, but we also have other power players making key moves. One of them is Venus, freshly entered into the sign of Virgo, and the other one is Mars. It is going to leave the sign of Libra and enter into its home sign of Scorpio, and this changes the energy significantly. And if this wasn't enough, Pluto is also standing still in the sky and preparing to go direct around the 10th of October. But before it can actually make progress, before it can actually move forward, it stands still, meaning that its symbolism is greatly emphasized, and also we are likely to see more of its shadow side. And this is really, really important because this is the last phase when all of us alive today are going to get Pluto finishing its job in the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn meaning top down authority, governments, leadership, everything basically that holds our world, our society, and even our individual normality in place, the structures of it. Yet Pluto is the planet of change. So this is the final moments, the final Plutonian activity that actually demolishes that which it proved over these years, over its stay in Capricorn. Because if I'm not mistaken, Pluto moved permanently into the sign of Capricorn in 2008. So since then, it is highlighting everything that doesn't serve us really structure wise, regardless of what that is in our lives. May it be a belief, a worldview, a situation, a material balance that basically keeps us going, regardless of what nature that structure basically uh, is in our lives. It highlights everything that is not working, that is not for our highest good, everything that basically has much more power over us than it would be healthy, taking into consideration our own personal balance, of course. And it asks us to take action. Now, another element with this Pluto, when Pluto behaves this way, as in it's standing still, preparing to move forward, its fated karmic element, basically, it where Pluto has this power to set bigger, larger karmic things into motion, basically to trigger the hand of fate, if you will. That side of Pluto is gonna also be emphasized. Now, I would just like to share my screen and go through the week with you guys. So the very beginning of the week, the 9th of October, is really, really strong and intense because at this moment, Mars is still holding a square with Pluto. And this square between these two planets that have to do so much with action, with assertion, with where we invest our focus, our intention, our power basically into, we could see this play out on the world stage, where in very many places in the world, conflicts that have been there are nothing new basically, really, really escalated. In other parts of the world, people or groups or in their own specific configuration really challenged, the law, the balance, the equilibrium of the law and legislation, especially if this has anything to do with the history of the country, of the place, or a law that has been ruling over the land for quite a long time. I do ask for your apology, but I do have a bit of, flu still going in my system. So those have been challenged. Why? Well, on one hand, because a few days ago, Mars was conjunct the South Node in the sign of Libra, and it activated it. And the South Node in Libra is exactly that. The law, the dynamics of any relationship, legal relationship, political relationship, ethnical relationship between two nations, etc. That which has been basically established in the past and kept on going, now it has to be released. So this is the time of change. Also, a few days ago, Mars was opposing the North Node in its home sign of Aries. And more importantly, the North Node, what was conjunct, is conjunct Mars' sister, Eris, planetoid of discord, especially in the sign of Aries. Eris is basically awakening all of us, even collectively speaking, to fight for what we think, what we feel that our rights are, our sovereignty, our independence, basically everything that the individual needs in life in order to be successful, or at least be in motion, so to speak, towards where they desire, of course. So this opposition between Mars and Eris, and again I have to highlight, Mars was activating conjunct the South Node in Libra. So the balance, the dynamics, the legislation, the skills of justice, highlighting the relationship that was basically ongoing, because the South Node is our collective karma, the past, which we have to release or do something with it, especially to, balance it, to create an equilibrium that works in the present, an update, so to speak. But because Mars is also planet of war, planet of action, etc., this was, this played out in a very intense and in a very, very spontaneous and quick way. So things got into motion very, very quickly. And of course, Eris conjunct the North Node and Mars opposing it. Now, this is where the fight, the challenge, the, mobilization of people or groups, etc., challenging the normality that is in the present and has been there until the present, that was, unavoidable, basically. But of course, this played out in a multitude of ways on the world stage. But perhaps one of the most significant is what happened in Israel very, very recently. Now, also, Israel, Mars is, even in this present moment, squaring Pluto. These two planets are each other's octaves, Pluto being the higher octave of Mars. So whenever they converse in tension, that can very well mean more of a militaristic action, a greater degree of violence, or when the challenge, basically is very, very literal, not just in a court of justice. Why? Because Pluto in Capricorn, as I said, the rich and the powerful, those who hold the power to create the law, the structure, this force stability, if that makes any sense. Now, this Pluto also is squaring the North Node and Aries at the same time. So again, aggravating people's cry out for justice, for their sovereignty, for their wills, their voices, their wants to be heard. And of course, then Pluto squares Mars and also the South Node. So this is basically a T square, which really, how should I say, it catalyzed these events. And at the beginning of the week, as you can see on the screen, Mars is still holding the square with Pluto. And as we progress in the week, Mars is getting to an erratic degree. So that also represents a moment of great tension, especially that both this Mars, South Node, and the Sun are in what is called via combusta, so the path of fire. This is when relationship and the dynamics of relationship do tend to change quite significantly. The sun represents the light of our consciousness, our awareness, basically. It is not very comfortable in the sign of Libra, neither is Mars. So this adds a certain kind of frustration to the symbolism of these planets. But perhaps in this context, the more important energy is the South Node because it needs to be released. It needs to be taken into consideration. It needs us, especially when it was activated by Mars, it needs us to be aware of what balance, what diplomatic relationship, what alliance, what partnership is simply not working in the present format. And with Pluto, especially as it's standing still in the sky, its karmic strength is greatly amplified. Pluto triggers everything on a larger scale. Now, without a shadow of a doubt, we are also going to feel this in our personal lives because the sign of Libra, of course, it falls in different places in our individual charts, a different house or a different configuration. That is absolutely fine because we might be feeling this energy of powerlessness, of or our powers being greatly diminished or challenged, or someone really triggering or aggravating us, especially someone that might have, an authority over us, a boss, an institution, the government, generally speaking, a partner, a parent. It can be simply anyone. Now that, of course, activates where this Libra, especially with the South Node in at 24 degree of Libra, falls in your personal chart. But collectively speaking, it doesn't even matter where Libra falls in your chart because Libra rules relationships in a general way. So all of our relationships are being triggered one way, maybe indirectly, but they're still being triggered. And we do have this impulse to figure out, find the right balance. What is working? What is not working? Mercury is also in the sign of Libra at this moment. And later on in the week, as you will see, Mercury also enters what we call via combusta. But Mercury is communication. This is where dialogues, terms and conditions, negotiations, important exchange of, again, terms and conditions are definitely going to be taking place regardless of what type of alliance, relationship, one-on-one we have in our lives. May it be marriage, romantic, contract, friendship, alliance, project-based alliance, basically anything. It is really going to be on the spotlight, under the spotlight. Sorry. And another effect of this Mars being so very close at the beginning of the week to the South Node is where, regardless of how the configuration of our individual lives is, we are empathically feeling, to a certain degree, of course, the collective unrest. So if you have like a certain feeling of stress, of especially inner stress, restlessness, an agitation, or feeling like something is about to stir up, something is about to happen, or that maybe you're running out of time, or you don't have all that much time to do this and that in your life, and your relationships especially are maybe on a soul level not all that there. This is where we feel empathically whatever is going on collectively. This is where the South Node invites us, like it or not, of course, to feel through the collective energy, to feel through the feelings of the masses, basically of what collectively our species or is feeling right now. And of course, it's restlessness. It is where alliances, diplomacy, and the law and legislation has to change. And this is exactly the other side of this energy, where law, legislation, big court battles in courts of justice, or however legislation is evolving. Now that is going to be challenged, debated, and again, two sides meet and have one way or another have to dish out their terms and conditions, and a kind of compromise, a sort of compromise, has to be born out of that. Now, other energies that we have at the very beginning of the week, as you can see, Venus has moved into the sign of Virgo, and it is conjunct Black Moon Lilith. Now, Venus in the sign of Virgo is not able to bring forward her highest qualities, especially her dreamy, romantic, and, fantasy nature, but she is very, very practical, and she is very, very down to earth. She has to, take on the expression and symbolism of Virgo, which is a mutable earth sign. Basically, Virgo in a nutshell, how can we adapt our situations, our surroundings, what we have in our lives, the fixity of the earth, and that the permanence of the earth, because Virgo is not fixed, it is actually mutable. So this is where it transforms the fixity into something more adaptable, but through our work, our intelligence, our brainstorming, figuring things out, study, mastery, etc., etc. So, of course, Venus, the passive element, the feminine element, the attraction element, everything that she needs in her life has to be as well concrete, real, down to earth, stable. Venus in the sign of Virgo is, if you love me, prove it physically. You know what I mean? Through gesture, through anything that is possible. So, this is like a take no BS Venus. Just like in the sign of Capricorn, where she can act very, very similarly. Whatever, has to impress her, that has to be applicable down to earth and to work and function. So this is not the typical romantic Venus that we are used to. This is the very, very practical one. Now, Venus, as soon as she enters into the sign of Virgo, as I said, she is conjunct Black Moon Lilith. So this emphasizes greatly the symbolism of Virgo, especially, the hair splitting side, the analytical side. This is where we really have to look at everything under a strict lens of practicality, because whatever is in our lives, if it's not all that practical, if it's not all that helpful in a real sense, chances are we are not all that much interested. Now, both Venus and Black Moon Lilith, sorry, Venus especially a day later, holds an opposition with Saturn. So that is very, very down to earth kind of energy, a reality check energy. This is where Saturn in itself in the sign of Pisces is limitative to to the dreamy fantasy, pure imagination and pure feeling qualities of Pisces. So, of course, all of these are included, but they have to have some kind of real element to them, either a truth to them, or to make sense, or to, make sense in one's ideological context. And then opposing Saturn, opposing Venus in the sign of Virgo, well, that tells us that whatever in our lives is just pure ideology, pure feeling, pure thought, pure fantasy, or even like, why not, Pisces is the spiritual sign. So if it's pure spirit but never manifests, if it's just a higher feeling, that is not worthy of our attention, of our focus. And chances are we are not all that much interested in pure fiction. Now, also, this energy is quite good for artists because even though it's not an easy energy, and artists and artistic creative people, the symbolism of Pisces, can find unusual shapes, forms, how to give even their most abstract artistic impulse a shape and form. So creative wise, it's a pretty good energy. And also this energy is where it can guide us to a much more healthier self-worth, exactly for the reasons I said earlier. If it's value, Venus, it has to show itself in a concrete and real way. Now, the opposition between Venus and Saturn can also represent that everything that we do not have in our lives, everything that we lack, everything that we miss, everything that, is simply not advantaging us, we might feel the frustration. We might feel that when our Saturn, planet of time, of course, when am I gonna get to let's say this state, that state, when I'll have this and that, and when my life gonna be more balanced, when I'll be able to have much more material pride in my life that I accomplished this and that. So that can very well be part of the energy. And at the same time, we must not forget that Mars and the South Node in Libra, and this week everything is setting up the eclipse. So of course, all of this week we are under the shadow of the eclipse. So all of these elements can make our partnerships and any kind of negotiation, and for us to make certain choices, that much more difficult, because the idealism or the principle of it is not going to be satisfactory. This is where idealistic action is not all that much encouraged. Because why? The North Node demands from us that we also serve our situations, and at least in 50% measure. So we cannot, ignore our situations, our needs, our wants, what we have to have in our lives, or what we uh, want to accomplish. Another energy is at the very beginning of the week, the sun holds a quincunx with Jupiter, planet of justice. So this is also where surprises may reach us, legally speaking. Maybe certain laws are very, very unfavorable and they do need to change rapidly. And especially from a material perspective, because Jupiter is in the sign of Taurus, so material worth, values, and even anything that has to do with self-esteem. And Taurus sometimes mean the basic needs. If the basic needs are not guaranteed by law, legislation, by our Libra, our rulers, the politicians, the diplomats, those people who work in justice, in the domain of justice, then we have a conflict here. Then we have a problem escalating everything. So let's move on. This is where we have the 10th. Venus opposes Saturn here. Exactly. And if that wasn't enough, the moon is also conjunct Black Moon, Lilith, Venus, and so Black Moon, Lilith, and Venus, and is opposing Saturn. So this is an energy where with the moon, we are really, really, really going to feel what limits us or what we do not have in our lives, or if we want it, or if we are working on it, we are on our journeys, on our path to accomplishing it, then we might feel the stressing factor of time. Why aren't things moving forward quicker? Why this, why that, the typical energy. But we must take into consideration that it is only now that karmic forces in a larger sense are just barely starting to make progress, because all throughout the summer we had the big retrogrades, then we had Mercury and Venus retrograde that put a full stop on everything. Now that both Venus and Mercury are well out of shadow and are making new ground, this gives us a sense of momentum, but this is where it's not enough to drag the very big things along with them. Yet Pluto changing directions this week, that gives the start that yes, slowly and surely fate is starting to pick up speed. Then the eclipse later on, the eclipse will be very important because it will really kickstart fate coming together. Now, of course, in the sense that what we need to release first of all, because it's going to be a south node eclipse, but like with any new moon, the conjunction of the sun and the moon, new things are starting to be born out of that as well. So one way that I interpret this eclipse is that there is going to be a big release, the past that South Node highlighted, and because of an action or how fate strikes or a decision or choice based on the clarity that we have, whatever we do with that, something new is going to be born out of the situation. And of course, collectively speaking, on the world stage, we will see the dynamics changing, but we're already seeing this, feeling this. All we need to do is just look around us and how so very many things that were in a way under control, under balance until this moment are really hanging in the air, demanding a new balance. And of course, there's a lot of fight, the energy of fight. I know that Mars isn't his more, feisty self in the sign of Libra, but when it is squared by Pluto, that doesn't matter as much because the square itself and the North Node being in Mars's home sign does require a certain kind of attitude or a fight. Now, of course, the fight doesn't have to play out in a physical, in a real way, but on the world stage, unfortunately, that is not the case, at least right now. So also on the 10th, Pluto is preparing, it's standing still in the sky and preparing to move direct, but the movement direct is in actual reality not gonna happen this week because it will barely start, any kind of forward motion. So it's very strong. It is extremely amplified. This is when all of us will have to do something with power dynamics in our lives. It gives us no choice. This is where fate is knocking on our door, and we do need to pay attention. And also on the 10th, we have another important aspect where the sun in Libra opposes Chiron in the sign of Aries, the wounding. This is where the wounding becomes all that much obvious to us, the sun, the light of our consciousness, the luminary. And later on, before the eclipse, the moon will also oppose Chiron. So again, wounding. Now, how this plays out on the world stage, that is very clear. All the wounded people, the actual physical wounding because of war, conflict, and natural calamities and accidents. But this can also play out in our personal lives. Now, we must be very careful because around this time, Mercury holds a semi-square, a sesqui-square, so a square and a half with Saturn. So we must really pay attention of how we speak, how we negotiate, how we express our feelings, how we express our truth, our terms and conditions, because Mercury is in the sign of Libra, because we can wound with our words, if we are way too intense, if we let this Pluto square Mars unleash a storm of angry words, then of course we can wound even permanently with our words. But with the sun opposing Chiron, we can also be able to see our own wounds and wounding in others, in the situation of others, in the story of others, and in our relationships as well. So this in this moment, the wounds are going to be reflected almost as if by a mirror within our relationships. Sorry. But this, in a way, it's positive because it leads us to much greater understanding of our own wounding. Moving on a day, we have Mars in an erratic position. So yes, this is where there are definitely going to be talks, Mercury, or decisions, choices in relationships. And when I say relationships, again, romantic relationship and marriages are just one example of many. It can be contractual situation, alliances, one-on-one. That partner can be government, institution, organization. It doesn't really have to be, someone else, like a person. And in rare cases, it can be another side or part of us, so to speak. And afterwards, Mars will enter into its home sign of Scorpio. But yeah, let's look at that. So on the 12th, Mars is already in the sign of Scorpio. Now, this is a massive energy shift because, as I said, Mars in the sign of Libra was in exile. It couldn't be its intense self because in Libra, it is almost forced energetically, esoterically, astrologically speaking, to take into consideration others, the wants of others, terms and conditions of others. It is forced to have a certain kind of empathy, basically. And even if Mars, because that is very typical of Mars, wants to accomplish something, well, in the sign of Libra, its first methodology is diplomacy. So understanding correctly the situation of the other, may that be company, job, whatever, in order to sign a fair contract, advantageous contract is very important. Now, in the sign of Scorpio, it takes no prisoners. In the sign of Scorpio, it's nighttime expression. And we must remember that Mars is the ancient ruling planet of Scorpio. This is where it's very, very, very individualistic. It is hell bent to achieve its goal. Mars in the Scorpio is like the treasure seeker, treasure diggers aspect, where as long as there is the motivation, the treasure, whatever it is that Mars needs to accomplish, to have, to find, to do, etc., nothing can stop it. It considers anything. Anything is fair play. Anything is game here. So as I said, it takes no prisoners. It goes straight to its target. It goes straight to its mark. And of course, it has a very different methodology, even in its home sign, than it has in its home sign of Aries, because Aries is courage, bravery, initiation, spontaneity. It seizes the moment, it seizes the opportunity. In the sign of Scorpio, it's a bit it can be silent. It's not as opportunistic because it's like a drill. It digs deep to the target. It doesn't matter what it has to dig through. It is going relentlessly. Now, this is both good because it does change the energy. It makes us more ambitious. It makes us dig for the truth. Scorpio, secrets, the sign of secrets, the sign of even the occult. But the occult, in this case, not necessarily magic and all that, but that which is kept under strict secrecy in that sense. So we are needing to find the truth in our own lives, in a relationship, what he has done, what he has been up to, what secrets she has. So this is where Mars is a little bit obsessive, and if that even makes sense. And it needs to uncover the truth. It needs to reach the bullseye, and how it doesn't really matter. So it gives us ambition, it gives us strength, it gives us power, it gives us the singularity that we need to focus and keep on focusing until we get where we need. Now, the not so favorable expression is exactly that it is capable of much more than usually, especially the negative things. It doesn't matter if it wounds, it doesn't matter what it walks through to get where it needs to be. And Scorpio's dark side is criminality, criminal money, the darkest kind of secrets, corruption, all of that. You know what I mean? So that is going to be amplified and highlighted. And Mars's stay in the sign of Scorpio is not going to be an easy one, because it will oppose Jupiter, it will oppose Uranus in both of these planets in the sign of Taurus. Jupiter expands Mars' symbolism and radicality in the sign of Scorpio. And Uranus, well, Uranus brings the unexpected. It brings the surprise. It brings sometimes the boom, the explosion. Mars, fiery planet, and Uranus, the chaos that goes with it. And I would also like to remind everyone, sorry, that in 2019, late autumn, so somewhere around November, when the COVID was brewing in the laboratory, so to speak, or when things were just in China contained, that's when the tension started to arise. That's when the outbreak happened. And I'm not saying that it has to play out the same way, that it's an outbreak or virus or whatever, even though Scorpio is the sign of toxicity and everything that has to do with poisons, toxins, pollution, etc., etc. Ceres, asteroid of nurture and food and whatever is sustenance to us, is also in the sign of Scorpio. But anyway, this can create like a calamity, a calamity which has something to do with technology or with the earth. Why? Because Taurus is the earth, the instability, earth movements, Uranus in it, or Uranus, planet of technology. And it may cause pollution or environmental disaster or anything where we see toxicity or poison or pollution or dirt, basically, manifests one way or another on the world stage. So that is all. But not yet, because Mars just barely entered Scorpio on the 12th of October. Oh, and also, as Mars entered, it is conjunct dwarf planet Haumea, and this to me says a certain kind of desperation, because Haumea is a very quantum expression, quantum creativity. This is where you create through your highest emotion, in a chaotic way, in a quantum way. This is where, as long as the emotion is there and is intense, like for example, a desire, reality just starts to mirror that. And Mars activates this Haumea. So this highlights that whatever we need in our lives, especially scorpionic elements like money, power, sex, sensuality, let's say, or a release, to terminate the situation already, to be free of something, this is going to be greatly amplified. So we are definitely going to be feeling this. Let me show you Haumea, because there's another aspect that I want to show you. This is Mars conjunct Haumea, and this is Mercury conjunct Pallas Athena. So this to me says, again, the 12th of October, negotiations, talks. Pallas Athena is the goddess of wisdom. We're really, really, really trying to understand and have the wisest, the most safe and sound and logical, rational approach to any kind of negotiation. May this be something that has to do with job, anything that has to do with courts of justice, a legal case we may have, negotiation or communication with an institution, partnership, friendship, love, all of that is included. But this is where we really, really want to embody our greatest wisdom here. So this is a really positive sign. But we must also not forget that this week, Mercury is holding, as I said earlier, a sesqui square with Saturn. So that's not an easy aspect, but it has good parts there. Saturn is something concrete. Saturn is something down to earth. Even in the sign of Pisces, it's still Saturn. And we may not like the solution. We may not like what we have to do or not to do, Saturn, limit ourselves from, but it's a solution and it's something in our lives that can work, that can take us forward. So this is where we are starting to see solutions in our lives. And as I said, the karmic energies, generally speaking, are starting to move forward. It gives us the sense that we are moving forward, even if we have a lot of limitations in our lives. And the other energy is Mars, but maybe this is a day later, holds a trine with Saturn. Now that is perhaps the saving grace within this energy, because that it has a certain kind of stability attached to it. Again, it might not be ideal. We might not like it all. We might not be all that much delighted with what life or situation or fate gave us as a modus operandi or a stability, a power, a strength that we can ground ourselves into, but we are using it. Good thing that we have at least something, This is the best way to approach this energy. Whatever it is that you have in your life as a strength, as a power, as a means of stability, as something to give you, Saturn, a structure, something to have your back. May that be a person, situation, energy, even Pisces, your faith, your magic, your manifestation abilities. For some people, this may play out, I have no friends, no relationship, the Libra energy, Mercury conjunct Pallas Athena. It highlights what we have in our lives or what we don't have. So I don't have all that much help and support, but no problem. I'm a really good, sorcerer or spiritualist. I know how to attract and manifest. There we go. That is what you have in your life, and it can work like a charm because Pluto sextiles Neptune. Sorry. So that is where it can very well work. And Neptune sextiles Uranus. So again, your own ingenuity, your own truth and authenticity, if that is magic or anything that has to do with the occult, Mars being in the sign of Scorpio, that works like a charm. So wherever we find our strength, we will gonna use that to move on, to make progress forward. Even if it's not the most ideal scenario, we'll take it because it is very, very helpful. That energy, Mars trine Saturn, is also really good to make something with everything that stems from the past. Saturn retrograde in the sign of Pisces is the past. Anything that has to do with healing, regeneration, fortifying ourselves psychologically, getting rid of traumas, getting rid of blockages, tuning into our courage, our strength, our ambition, our determination, the singularity that we need in our lives to move on forward. It is really good for anything that has to do with metaphysics. Again, both Saturn and Mars are in signs that have so much to do with the spirit, magic, and the power that it has on our lives. So, and everything that has to do with arts and art. Why? Mars in the sign of Scorpio is transmutation. Scorpio is the sign of alchemy and art, artistic creation in their essence are products of transmutation. And then Saturn being in the sign of Pisces, everything that has to do with fantasy and art and the spirit. And, basically art is just how our own being, how our soul, even our unconscious, interprets the divine source. You know what I mean? So all of that is also really, really highlighted and can work like a charm. And last but not least, you see Juno here. Juno preparing to reach the very, very end degrees of the sign of Leo. Juno is the asteroid of partnerships. Quincunx, Pluto, exactly. So this quincunx is very tight, very, very exact. Surprises again may come from our partnerships. Surprises that might be game changers. A quincunx usually is nothing that is under our control or depends on us, but this can play out in both ways. It can be a positive surprise where out of the blue, in an unexpected, right off the bat, as they say, uh, something that gives us power, Pluto, a relationship perhaps, changes the dynamics within our lives, especially how we feel. Or a partner, perhaps, or an authority figure comes with something new that might change our feelings. Now, this is also quite possible. Now, let's get to the 14th when we have, let me, this will do. So the 14th when we have the annular solar eclipse in the sign of Libra. I have a separate video with detailed analysis about this eclipse. If you'd like to know more, feel free to check it out. And if you'd like to know how this eclipse may influence you personally, individually speaking, where it exactly falling in your chart, I have a tutorial video how to read your own chart. Check that also out if you're guided. But a couple of words about the eclipse. As I said in the video, it changes profoundly the dynamics of relationships in our lives. Libra, it is based on the South Node. So again, something that we either have access in our lives in or something that we need to release. The Sabian symbol of this eclipse is a child. Uh, I uh, I have a moment. I may not redo the symbolism as it says on the Sabian symbols list, but it is something about a child giving water to birds at a fountain. So something like this, which represents our greatest compassion. It represents the innate compassion of the human spirit. But this is eclipsed. You know what I mean? So this is an compassion has a lot to do with the sign of Pisces. So this eclipse is quincunxed by Uranus from the sign of Taurus. So this means surprise, surprise. This means something unexpected, maybe financial, material, self-worth wise, or our five senses are gonna, you know, rearrange the situation. They will come with some kind of surprise that will, an unexpected situation that will kind of force this rearrangement of our alliances and relationship. Now, on the world stage, that is pretty clear. It can be something financial, especially in the US, something being born on the US, because this is the final moment when Pluto is conjunct the natal Pluto of the United States in the country's second house of economy. So something without a shadow of a doubt takes place there that will reverberate collectively, internationally speaking. But in our individual lives, there will be an element of surprise that will change the dynamic either of a big contract in our lives or a relationship or a partnership or alliance, of course, wherever this 21 degree of Libra falls into your chart. But it also holds a quincunx with Neptune. So again, a disillusionment, something where we might be asked, to reconsider if having compassion, again, the Sabian symbol, the child giving water to the animals, to the birds. So we might be asked to reconsider if our gestures, of our attitude of compassion, altruism, solidarity is actually healthy or it is self-defeating. Because sometimes an overflow, an excess of compassion can feed narcissists, can feed a really toxic relationship, or it can permanently self-sabotage us because we only look at either the union, the relationship, the contract, why not, or just at the other side and never at our own needs. So sometimes, of course, our lives, our situations are not going to advance forward if we turn a blind eye to our own needs and just give everything to the other. May that other be a job, a relationship, a partnership, a project. So this is where we do need to incorporate, because, an eclipse, the North Node conjunct Aries, stands across the sky from this eclipse. So Aries' symbolism with the North Node, what the self needs, what our movement forward in life needs, that cannot be ignored at this time. So this is why relationships and the dynamics of relationships are gonna change for good. Because an eclipse is like a reset. Things will never be the same after the reset. And another important element is, on one hand, the eclipse, the new moon, is sandwiched between Mercury and the South Node. So Mercury figuring it out, communication, and facts, mercurial facts. The truth is definitely going to be there. And Mercury is opposing Chiron at the moment of the eclipse. So again, wounding. Maybe the eclipse is going to trigger a kind of wounding or a breakdown in a relationship, or it will evoke, it will remind of us a big wound that we have within ourselves. But again, that wound can be the cause why the dynamic of the relationship changes, or contract, or whatever. And on the world stage, I do believe this will represent investigation, Mercury, needing to understand, or efforts for peace to stop wounding. Or, as I said with the eclipse, if a long-lasting conflict was the specifics of the diplomatic relationship, then this gives a chance for peace. Because it it eclipses, it resets whatever is in life until that moment. And also, finally, on the 15th, we have the moon conjunct Mars. So this amplifies the feeling that we do need to break through, that we do need to get where we have to be in life. Mars in the sign of Scorpio, whatever it takes, we do need to embody these scorpionic needs. And what are the scorpionic needs? Well, Scorpio Taurus axis, either financial, either anything that has to do with values, even from a psychological perspective, self-worth, how attractive we feel, anything that has to do with sensuality, sexuality, everything that has to do with health, health in the sense that a very harmonious, or what's that word that I'm looking for? Um, you know, everything that is integral, wholesome, physical well-being. So, or it can also represent something that has to do with our creativity, because the sign of Taurus, especially Uranus in it, it is almost asking for us to embrace our authenticity. And if that is rooted in any kind of creativity, skill, talents, whatever may pose a value, a big value in our lives, this Mars there is asking us to do it, to embrace it, to use it. So this energy is definitely going to be quite intense. And this week is going to be very intense, with a lot of surprises, with a lot of unexpected, especially with Uranus quincunxing the sun, but also the eclipse and also the moon, and with Mars in the sign of Scorpio, preparing for a very, very, very intense transit. So the guidance here is for us to try and embrace wisdom. And this is where life and the circumstances are not giving us all that much choice. Like it or not, our own personal situation, our own breakthrough, our own needs are going to be top priority. Why? Because without life and, the general configuration of the energies might defeat us very, very quickly if we are not fit for survival, basically. And this not to be taken very radically, not in an animalistic way, although in some places, some cases, this energy may play out like that as well. But, symbolically speaking, our survival, our needs, our move through life. So if we do not focus on that when it's greatly needed, then basically everything else in life might just tear us into million different directions. Like the chaos of Uranus will just take us away. Or Mars in Scorpio. Well, Mars in Scorpio is gonna really, really catalyze and amplify the greed in others. You know what I mean? Greed, generally speaking. So people will just tear us apart for their own needs. This is where we have no choice but to embrace this wisdom, this determination, this singularity, and work with whatever the Mars trine Saturn highlights in our lives. That's where our options, our power, our choices lie. And also, this is where we need to embrace, however, the eclipse is changing our partnerships, because that South Node release is going to be very, very important. It will give us the opportunity to live life in a fresh and new way that we could not have before, due to either a karmic relationship, a karmic entanglement, Libra. This is where it can be a moment of divine justice, when the divine, through the means of the eclipse, but of course we cannot expect this immediately, because the sphere of influence of any eclipse is when it happens, but also 6 months after. So wherever the divine wants to put us in the correct, for us personally, of course, line of destiny, we need to allow this and we need to play along. But of course, we also need to detach from the collective doom and gloom and the violence and the fights and everything that are gonna just escalate with Mars entering into the sign of Scorpio. So if it's not our fight, if it's not our conflict, if it's not our justice, then we do need to detach from it and not allow it to suck us in. Yet, if it is our fight, then we need to fight with wisdom, with balance, with our spirits, mind over matter, if it's possible. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the beautiful comments. Thank you for all the love. If you'd like to support my channel, please like and share and thumbs up because I do need subscribers. And of course, you can donate in the PayPal link in the description below. Thank you, everyone. I'm wishing you a blessed week and be very, very strong because it's going to be really intense. Until next time, bye for now.